Welcome. We are here about to engage in another roundtable discussion. I'm Darin and I'm here with some friends, Gentry Eddings and Belinda Johnson, and we're going to be talking about trauma today. And so why don't you guys just say a little bit about yourselves, just so we can kind of hear who you are and what you do, and just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive right in talking about this very important issue of topic of trauma.
Yeah. Go ahead, Belinda.
So I'm Belinda Johnson, and I have been on staff since 2016. I'm a counselor, and I have been fully licensed since 2012. So I've been around in private practice and on staff.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I'm married, and I have children and grandchildren.
That's important to know.
Very important.
That's important to know.
Yes.
I'll start where you left off. Okay. I'm Gentry, and I'm married as well to my wife, Hadley. And we have twin boys, Isaiah and Amos. Mm-hmm. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Untitled Chapter. Specifically at the Ballantyne campus, I get the privilege of being the campus pastor. So I've been at Forest Hill since 2008, spent the first part of my time here as a worship leader, and now get to be a pastor.
Yeah, great. Well, it's great to have you guys here. I get the privilege of being a pastor here at Forest Hill Church as well, and a counselor as well. So we all kind of sit in, pretty sacred places with people. And, I'd love to just kind of dive in with, the reality of trauma, right? Mm-hmm. Like we hear that word thrown around quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And, I would say now my feeling is that like there's kind of an awareness or kind of an acceptance of trauma in a way that, even, 20 years ago, in previous generations, it wasn't really named that. Mm-hmm. And so, let's just kind of talk a little bit about what is trauma and what makes something traumatic. And I love that we have both the pastoral kind of perspective, and then also we get a chance to kind of engage with the, the counseling and psychological portion of that as well too. So let's kind of, let's talk a little bit about that. What makes something traumatic? What is trauma? What would you say?
Yeah. So I want to sort of comment on the first thing that you said about that people now are much more aware of what trauma is. My first experience when I was in counseling, not as a counselor, I was told that I had PTSD, which is basically post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was shocked that I had trauma. So trauma back in that day was not as widely understood or known as it is nowadays. Now people are pretty comfortable saying the word and acknowledging possibly if they've had some trauma. Most people have had trauma, if not all people. And I know that we'll probably get into that, but trauma, from my understanding, is basically when you have a really, it could be a single event, it could be a huge event, it could be like an accident, it could be assault, it could be anything that might be a single event that would be a large traumatic event. But it also can be a series of smaller events that are chronic traumas that happen over time. And these things cause a pretty strong emotional, psychological response in you. And the lingering effects of it is part of why we consider it trauma, that it isn't resolved. So, like if you are at a store and you see something, like maybe you see a homeless person outside, which, we're seeing a lot of, and they have just something really severe, disability, and you may feel really sad. When you get home, you're probably not going to remember that. And that is not a traumatic event for you. It is for that person, but that's not your trauma. So that would be an example, maybe.
Yeah. And I started thinking too, of just those events and experiences that we have, but it's also just from, a biblical perspective, just a little bit of the way of the world we live in.
Yeah.
Since we live in a fallen world, God's original intent was everything for it to be at peace and whole, but it's just not that way.
Right.
And so we feel that when we go through an event, but we also just feel that because our souls apart from God, because of our sin, because of our brokenness in us and around us, it's just that awareness of a dissonance from what we were created to experience and what we are actually experiencing every day. That's not that peaceful, good, original intent that God had for us.
Yeah, I love that. The reality, like even from a biblical and theological perspective, like when we look at the story and the narratives that we find in scripture, it's full of trauma, right?
Yeah.
Both single event trauma, right? These moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like that was absolutely devastating. And then you have like these patterns or reoccurring traumatic experiences, right? Both, you were talking a little bit about kind of the idea of big T trauma, like what we oftentimes think of traumatic experiences, like, like a Vietnam veteran or like somebody who's been in combat or like a major natural disaster where like literally it was life threatening. But sometimes we don't always think about trauma in our stories or like, in the world as much as like those small T trauma, right? Which could be things that maybe you're like, I don't really think that was traumatic. But when we look at the impact that it's had on us, we're like, no, that actually was.
Yeah. And I think you see that a lot with anxiety, that repetition of, like you said, of those small things that just add up day after day after day of why can't I sleep now? Why can't I breathe now? I don't know why. I don't have a big T moment, but I'm stuck.
Yeah.
And that's all the accumulation of that.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's important to also acknowledge that big T trauma, small T trauma doesn't mean that small T trauma is insignificant, that it's the accumulation of small T traumas that can actually be even possibly just as complex or more, because it could have appeared over a period of time, like abuse, neglect, all the different kinds of abuse. It could be loss of a family member when you're a child. It could be, parent or sibling loss. It could be a serious illness in the family that is a life-threatening illness.
I think of some of the students go through bullying on a regular basis, things online or at work. If you're an adult, you maybe have a coworker who's beating you up all the time and not helping you. So many different things, right?
Yeah. No, that's super important. I love that you named kind of the reality of some of the things that we wouldn't necessarily consider traumatic, right? But like, neglect can be as traumatic, right?
Yes.
And that maybe you had everything that you needed growing up. Like, you had a roof over your head, you had clothes on your back, but maybe you didn't have like even somebody to be with you in moments of distress. And this wasn't just like a one-time thing. This was like, no one was really there for you to walk with you through, the journey of coming up through adolescence, all that stuff, childhood. And those things can be forms of neglect that can have, again, profound implications for the way that we live our life, what we experience in our bodies. Hey, why am I experiencing anxiety in these particular situations? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the effects, both body, soul, and spirit. But like, let's talk a little bit more about like the effects and impacts of trauma. Like, how would somebody, know that they have been traumatized or experienced trauma? Like we were talking about the reality of that, like we live in a, like to live in this world, to live this life is to experience trauma, fragmentation, the fragmentation of shalom, right? The Bible talks about shalom, this peace, this wholeness. And when these things happen in our life, right, living this life, there's disintegration or fragmentation that happens. I know those are kind of like big words, but basically it's like the destruction of what God has originally intended us for.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what are some common ways that you guys, as you've walked with people either, in counseling or pastorally or just in, maybe in your other relationships, how do you see that showing up, for common ways that's showing up? Maybe that you've kind of borne witness to.
Well, I mean, it can show up in many ways. And a lot of times people do deny that they have trauma when they have trauma because they're not aware of what's happening. They may know that, or they may have a sense things are off, that they don't seem to have the life other people have. They may be sad a lot. They may have anxiety. Those are things where we're not always aware of. When we've been through a horrific event, we're aware that something horrible happened and that was probably trauma, but it's when we're under that chronic, umbrella of events happening. And I think of that especially when you're a child growing up in a home where it's not a healthy functioning home. And so children, may act out if they've had trauma. Adults, what I see is being stuck sometimes in their journey. Sometimes, if they're able to name something, that's a starting place. But otherwise, we kind of have to explore and see what's going on. Why are you having the feelings you're having? Obvious traumas. Maybe you're having flashbacks of an event. Maybe you're having intrusive thoughts. Maybe you're avoiding situations or places. Maybe you're hypervigilant of different situations. Those things are indicators of trauma. But there's the other traumas that, we're not necessarily always aware of. All we know is that we're having, we don't sleep at night. We maybe use substances to escape, to relax. Maybe we get involved in addictions besides substances, gambling or shopping or
like workaholism, right? Working too much and pouring into that, right? Different levels of escape.
Right. Pornography.
Right.
I mean, there's just so many different ways. We numb out, like if you are numb, or not connecting with people, having a hard time to experience closeness. There's a myriad of ways that we won't necessarily label it at the beginning and say, but we may suspect, and then we want to explore with our client, or we may want to ask some good questions about what's going on.
I think it's interesting that one of the first ones you brought up was a child acting out.
Yeah.
And I think we typically think of trauma showing up in those ways of like emotions or even substance abuse or something like that. But having some grace for this idea of people might do things that are, we would say that's a bad, wrong action, that a sinful thing that you're doing there. But the reason they're doing it is not necessarily just because they want to do a bad thing. It's because they have a trauma behind that. And you see that a lot, I think, with kind of like sexual abuse situations where they're longing for intimacy, but they're going about it the wrong way because of a trauma from maybe being abused as a child or something like that. And so that's a big cycle here that you run into with trauma.
And I'm just reminded too, as I've sat with people, just the propensity, like you said, Belinda, to not name what they've been through as traumatic. They don't even have an awareness, right? They wouldn't call it that. Like, I've been through some hard stuff, or maybe they'll say things like, everyone has difficult things, right? And so they'll even minimize those experiences. But then how do we know that somebody has been affected by trauma? Well, we will notice, this is a really common way, is sometimes I've sat with people who have very strong reactions to seemingly small things. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And you're like, that seems like a disproportionate response to what the event called for.
That wasn't supposed to hurt that bad.
Yes,
it was a gentle poke.
Exactly. And so, when you were talking, Gentry, I was thinking about the title of a book that's actually on trauma and developmental trauma, and is called, What Happened to You? So the idea of, instead of saying what's wrong with you, what happened to you? Something in your story, something in your experience, something happened along the way that, like how can that point and help us give us clues to like, you've been through something like this has impacted you, like holistically in a lot of ways, right?
And that makes me think of what are those moments? I think this is real practical for people to kind of find out what is maybe a trigger to remember a trauma. Is what are those moments in your day where you're sitting somewhere and all of a sudden your fists start to clench up, or you start to get angry about something. Like you said, you have a big reaction about something. Those are those signals going, that's tied to something. And if I slow down and process that with somebody or even just reflect myself, I might trace that back to something.
Yeah. And I love, Gentry, that you're talking about even like the noticing of the hands, because like, really what's so important to know about trauma is that in the research over the last, like especially the last 20 years has really given us a lot of new insight into like trauma lives in the body.
Yes.
Right. Like it, and I think sometimes in our communities of faith and, with Christianity and we haven't always done the best job of honoring the body. Right. But like the Lord has really, like wonderfully created us, right? Like and so we know this, but then like, how does actually trauma impact our bodies? Well, like those physiological responses, and so, like if it's so easy for us to think about, like, if you like were on the soccer field and you, broke your leg or like sustained like a muscle injury or something like that, right? Your body is going to remember that in different ways, right? But then somehow like we only think about traumatic things as like, oh, it's only psychological or emotional,
right?
But what we know to be true is that our brain is, you can't separate that from the rest of your body. So if you're like shoulders up, or maybe you're noticing racing heart, or these are kind of indicators again that like you're having a response to something, and it's not just emotional, it is actually physiological.
Yes.
And so one of the things that's fascinating is that we know that people who've been through traumatic experiences, sometimes their autonomic nervous system is dysregulated, especially people who have had recurring experiences, right? That they're actually living, their body's constantly pumping out cortisol, stress hormone, and their body, and that contributes to a whole other host of issues, other illnesses, and predisposes them to other things. And so we know this affects our physical health, and so just important to remember that. So like our bodies, but then our soul, like when I think about, the definition of when I think about like what the soul is our mind, will, and emotions, right? Like this also affects our choices. It affects the way in which we feel, right? It affects our ability to even think and kind of process information. And then spiritually as well too. This is actually one of the more fascinating things is like, how would you guys say the spiritual, like we know that there's our battle is not against flesh and blood, right? We know that there's a spiritual realm, there's this cosmic conflict that's happening. How do you see trauma intersecting with kind of the reality that there's spiritual and cosmic conflict that's happening between the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of God?
Oh yeah, I think that because it's so layered, it depends on, who you are, which one you're more aware of. You might be more aware of your body first, or your emotions, or how it's affecting your thinking. Often I think we miss that spiritual side to it. But I think one of the big questions that trauma raises is, am I safe? Is there hope for me? And those are big questions that I think that spiritual answers help give the soul an anchor and some guidance to find peace in the midst of trauma, right? And that's where when we find in Jesus hope and this idea of redemption and healing, purpose, and for now and for eternity, with these traumatic things that are going on, this idea of eventual restoration, that he holds the end, right? Those spiritual truths bring peace to us as we walk through trauma. Likewise, spiritual, unseen, reminds us that just like there's God who is for us and has all these good things for us to anchor ourselves, there's the reality that there's an enemy of our soul who is going to spin lies at us in the midst of our trauma to try to make it worse. And that those questions, am I safe? Is there hope? His answer is going to be, you're not safe. There's no hope. You're condemned. Things like this in the midst that can exacerbate the trauma until we anchor ourselves in what's true from God's word.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that you really tackled like, the evil, the way that evil can hunt us in specifically in a very sinister and sometimes even subtle way of planting lies in those moments where harm or trauma has been experienced, right?
Yeah.
And so the questions of like, you aren't safe. You are all alone, right?
Yeah.
And so those lies, even the accusations that can come against me, like you're unlovable, right? You're never gonna be enough. Those types of things are really what you're talking about.
Can I share a little story behind that?
Yeah, please.
So in 2013, right after our first son was born, my wife had an ulcer perforate. She had to go to the ER. Very scary moment for me, seeing my wife just struggling to survive. And really it was life-threatening for her. Coming out of that raised those questions for me personally, God, where were you? I thought you loved us. Why would this happen to my wife? And the enemy, this is what he did for me in that moment. Are you sure that God loves you? Are you sure that what you've heard all your life about God's grace for you is true? And he spins that lie of condemnation. That you don't have hope, that you don't have peace with God, that you're outside of his favor. That's scary. Yeah. That's stressful. That brings sleepless nights, all sorts of things, right? And for me in that experience, freedom came, peace came by claiming, for me it was Romans 8:1. There is no condemnation for those that are in Jesus. And I had that open beside my bed, like for nights on end, just claiming that and standing on that in the face of the just flat out lie that the enemy was trying to spit in my face, right?
Yeah.
And that's the spiritual side of trauma. You've got this event, then you've got those emotions and all of that happens to you, but then you've got the liar and the truth. Yeah. And you've got to just cling to that truth as you're navigating trauma. Yeah.
Now, you're speaking about this event with your wife, Hadley.
Yeah.
And you are talking about kind of the process through that. And you are no stranger to trauma yourself. Would you share a little bit of your story and what you've navigated, how you've navigated it? Just kind of go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So that was in 2013. And there was a lot of questioning, right? I realized looking back that God was using that to prepare my faith and my heart to walk through something actually even harder. So in 2015, we were in a car accident. It was May. We were coming home from the beach, and my family was hit from behind by a large box truck. The driver of that truck, kind of every distracted driving thing in the book was going on. He was under the influence. He hadn't slept all night. He was texting and driving and trying to grab a biscuit at the same time. So just distracted. Rear end our car with this huge truck, and we lost our son, Dobbs. He was 2 years old at the time. He passed away instantly because of that car accident. And my wife was also pregnant, 36 weeks. They rushed her to the hospital. She had an emergency C-section, and we lost our second son, Reed, 2 days later. And, unexpected. Obviously, our life was joyful. One child that we love. And one child on the way. And so just shattered in that moment. And I can tell you that it was actually that experience and what God taught me from my wife's ulcer and the ER experience that prepared me to walk through and this trauma, this bigger trauma with faith and realize those truths that God, we're not always going to understand. I think that's one of the hard things with those questions. Faith is a part of how we have to walk through this life. There's some things we can know. We know them by faith. and faith in his word, faith that he's with us, faith that, this is the hard thing with trauma. Right now it hurts, but do we believe that that's the end? Sometimes, we get stuck because we think this is all there is. We can only see right in front of us.
Right.
But we believe that God has the end of the story, that this trauma hits us right now in this broken world. But because of Jesus and because of the resurrection, that God gets the final word.
Yeah.
And that really, again, that's an anchor. That's a big deal for all of us.
And I imagine, Gentry, just like, that you and Hadley are still, in many ways, like that, like going through the loss, that devastating. You don't just come away with that without No. Like you still have a process. Can you share just a little bit about?
Yeah, I think grief comes with love and loss. And so, I mean, it's there's no words for this type of grief.
Right.
There are, but I can't say them on here.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of grief. You're angry, you're sad. I mean, and you walk through that as it comes. Early on, it was just all the time. There's shock, not feeling anything. There's anger. And, what I love about the Psalms is that that's just real.
Yes.
And your relationship with God should be real. You should cry out and say, I am angry. I am confused. I don't understand.
And God welcomes that, right?
Yeah, he does. He welcomes that. And you walk that out in your own way. Hadley and I's relationship, we leaned into supporting one another. And everyone has a different journey through grief and when it hits them and how it hits them. But we carry that. I mean, to this day, and people say we have 2 living children and 2 children in heaven, but those 2 children are always going to be a part of our lives. And that, the hard part about that is a lot of what we carry in them is a grief.
That's right.
And that's part of the experience. My parenting of them in some way is a grief.
Yeah.
Now it's a joy in a different way, but there's a grief that we walk through. And so it's a journey that really, I think, is going to be our entire lives this side of eternity until we're fully redeemed and with them again.
Yeah. And I think that kind of Gentry, thank you so much for sharing that with us. The reality to hear that, you're really still telling the story from the middle, right? Like this isn't, it's, we love to hear stories of like, well, this is what I went through and now I'm past it, right? But oftentimes the effects, like we know that the resurrection has changed everything. We know that there's hope and the invitation to even in mystery and the not knowing, right? The questions of like, God, where were you when I was being abused? God, why, like where were you in this place? Like when this was happening, right? And so this process of healing and the effects of trauma still linger with us as we also live in the tension between, okay, we still live in a broken world and there's still real hope. And this isn't the end of the story. But I really appreciate the tension that you've really just described of what that has looked like, some of what you and Hadley have walked through.
I was just going to say, thank you for sharing that. Not everybody walks through such a horrific trauma. And it's so hard to even almost wrap your mind around what, you and Hadley have been through. But there are so many people that take courage and hope, even if their trauma feels less than, just because it's like, it's encouraging, And I think that the questioning of God is so normal that occurs in trauma, especially really hard traumas, really big traumas. and that God can take it. God can take, he knows anyway what we're thinking. So we're fooling ourselves when we think we're hiding something from him. And he's with us through it. He won't leave us in the midst of our questioning, our shaking our fist, our yelling, our screaming and crying out to God. How could this happen? How can you let this happen? God, we know all things pass through your hands, and it is a process that turns you inside out in a sense.
Yeah. It makes me think too of, I think it's in James where there's that trials will come, but count into joy because they're going to lead towards something.
Yes.
Endurance, perseverance.
Yes.
And God can use that.
Yes.
You know, I would never have chosen to have my wife have her ulcer, to have our children die. But what God has done, and listen, none of us are staying here forever.
No.
So it changes your perspective on our time here, right?
Yes.
When you realize that this is not the end game. None of this. Ultimately, we're heading towards a redeemed, shalom, peace, eternal reality. So what God's doing is kind of beyond, it's beyond our understanding, but it changes how you walk through it. And what he can do through this is not only bless others and reach the world with that hope, but in you, he can give you a deeper, more lasting, real peace and joy as you lean in through your trauma to those questions and persevere in finding the answers that are there. That encourage your faith and your hope, right?
Yeah, and we have a choice to lean in or to lean out.
Yes.
But if we lean out, we can still go back and lean in. It's not that, because in our grief journey, it's not linear. It is just up and down and all over the place. And we're going to experience so many emotions and over time and all the emotions. And God, thank God, we have God. You know, I always say to clients, you know, where would we go without you? Who would we have in heaven?
That's right.
You know, and we all go through hard times, and God brings us through those times when we choose to look at him. It's not easy. And there'll be a lot of times of, are you really there, God? And do you really love me? And do you care? But if we can hold on, he's got us. He's got us.
Yeah, it reminds me of that concept of like, there's no need for faith without mystery, right? You know, we don't get,
faith is faith.
Yeah,
it's not.
That's right. And oftentimes, you know, when people ask the question, like, why? Like, God, why? Oftentimes that's not like, if we had the answers, that really wouldn't actually like alleviate what we're feeling. It's really like the depth of grief of what you're talking about, or like, this isn't how it was meant to be, you know? And I'm curious though, like, you know, a couple things for somebody who's listening to this that has maybe not been through something maybe as obviously as traumatic as like, you know, a car accident, right? Or something, a loss of somebody or children or anything that we've kind of talked about, those big T traumas. What would you say to somebody who is, you know, questioning whether they've been affected by trauma, or maybe they're even saying like, or showing some curiosity about, what areas of my life have been affected by, you know, big T trauma or small T trauma? What would you encourage them to do, and how would you encourage them to kind of begin to walk that out?
I guess one of the first things I would say is to really develop self-awareness, to kind of really start to become a student of yourself. And I know there's a whole navel gazing, and you know that has a negative connotation. And so I'm not talking about self-absorption and you know, being self-centered, but I am talking about exploration and curiosity of what's happening inside of me. And it could be first thinking physical reactions. You know, what am I noticing physically? Like, why am I tensing up in certain situations? Why am I feeling my muscles clench, or hot or sweaty, or my heart beating faster? What's going on? And learning to to just sit with those things and explore, be curious about, but then also in your awareness, like my reactions, like what are my reactions to people, situations? Why am I not excited or happy about going to do something? Or, sometimes we're more aware of a fear or anxiety, and that's a little bit easier to kind of sit and explore. But a lot of times we're moving through life at such a frenetic pace that we are not aware. We're not aware of what's happening in ourselves, and we're not aware of our interactions and how we're moving through life. And so slowing down, paying attention to what's going on around me, what's going on in me, what am I thinking, what am I feeling, and obvious things that, if there's a disruption, let's say I lose my job and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I did or what happened. And there's, I thought I was the best worker, employee, and yet something's not measuring up when there's like incongruity, like between our external world and what we think is our internal world. There's so many things, that might cause us to begin an exploration of what's going on. If we develop, problems in our marriages or in our dating relationships or raising a family, what's happening? What's causing this? There's more to the story.
Yeah. I've got two things that come to mind. One would be writing, either journaling or what I like to do is I use my Word document and type it out on my computer. At the end of the day, just kind of what were the big events? How was I feeling? Like what emotions did I have today? And what's behind all that? Was I stressed today? Was I angry today? What was going on? As a guy, it's kind of been enlightening because I know guys don't really lean into emotion, but for me to kind of take a moment, and I think it slows the pace down, and you'll be surprised at what is revealed when you kind of reflect on what you're experiencing. And you can do that privately. I like to do it that way. Other people like to verbally process. So find a safe person and process.
There's a practice called examine an old church historical practice, and it's sort of doing that. It's phrased in the way of, where did I feel close to God today? And where did I feel far away? And then that can lead into some of those same things of, I felt far away because I lost my temper. When I was driving, I cut somebody off and I was mad because I had to get somewhere and they were in my way, and then it's like, wow, I did not feel close to God in that moment. And, but where did I feel? And maybe it was sharing a conversation of depth and meaning, not shallow and, superficial conversation, but really having some real connection with somebody and spiritual connections. So.
I love that you're both talking about like having this sense of reflecting, intentional reflection, but doing it with a sense of curiosity and kindness. Like, cause if you enter into that and be like, oh man, I didn't do this and this, that's not really ultimately going to be helpful.
Right.
With a sense of like, I wonder why I did that. Or I wonder why I felt that, at this part of the day, and so,
why was that pressure to get there? Like, who am I trying to please?
Right. What was that really about?
What's that an insecurity perhaps about or a threat feeling? So,
Yeah. And I think, I know we could talk about this topic. Like we're just scratching the surface, really.
Yes.
I mean, this is not an exhaustive conversation on trauma, but I really appreciate what each of you have shared. Any kind of parting thoughts, or just for somebody who's listening to this deeper discussions, roundtable discussion about as they consider thinking about trauma, either from a spiritual perspective or even from a psychological perspective, or maybe somebody who's considering counseling or meeting with somebody. Any encouragements that you would offer to those out there?
I think that I would encourage them to become self-aware, to slow down, first of all, to really start to be aware of how they are and how they react and what's happening in their body, and to be curious and to maybe talk to somebody. And it could be a friend. And then it may be that they decide they want to pursue that, with somebody in a professional way. But you don't always have to have a counselor to have some processing ability with a friend.
Yeah.
So
sometimes it can be just the question of like, hey, how do you experience me?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody who's safe though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Belinda.
No, I've appreciated the conversation. I think that I would just say that there's hope. We're talking about a lot of brokenness.
Yes.
And it's sad. We do live in a hard world.
Yeah.
And if you haven't gone through trauma, you probably will at some point.
Yes.
And I think what I would just say is an encouragement that God gets the final word.
Yeah.
And it's a good one.
Yeah.
He has the restoration secure. So we can take lots of hope in the midst of all the trauma and all the struggle.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that living life in light of eternity, right? Like that perspective of like, what's our future hope? Like, and what does that rest upon? That's huge. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me in this conversation.
Yes.
Really has been a sacred space. And if you have enjoyed this conversation and learning more about trauma, you can go to foresthill.org/counseling to learn more.